Hey ladies, I wanted to talk to you guys today about how God uses pain and suffering, especially in light of everything that's going on right now with the Las Vegas shootings, which I know some of you guys were directly affected by that, just knowing somebody that was there, friend or family member, and then of course all of the natural disasters that are going on right now. I just thought that this was a really fitting topic for everything that's going on. I want to tell you guys, though, of course, this isn't going to be a comprehensive look on the topic because it's one of those really theologically deep issues. So this is really just going to be just kind of a quick overview on how God uses pain and suffering in our lives. C.S. Lewis wrote a book called The Problem of Pain, which I'll have listed as a part of your resources in case you guys want to study this out a little bit more. But in his book, he writes, God whispers to us in our pleasures, speaks in our conscience, but shouts in our pains. It is his megaphone to rouse a deaf world. And first we must remind ourselves, of course, that pain and suffering are not a part of God's original plan, right? With the fall of man, we see sin, pain, and suffering enter into the world. And now, thousands of years later, we are sort of having to navigate through, a lost and a fallen world. So though it wasn't his original plan, in his sovereignty, he uses it to accomplish his will. And I know that each of us has encountered, pain and heartache and hardship in our lives. And sometimes we're left, with no other questions other than why God. And I want to point out that God's not offended by our asking this question. Even Jesus from the cross asked, God, why have you forsaken me? And this served a dual purpose. With him asking this question, it fulfilled prophecy, Old Testament prophecy that would say, that he would say these exact words from the cross. The other thing that it did when he said these words is it connects Jesus, God himself, to our humanity and to our suffering. So we can't ever say that God never endured suffering, because he did. He went, through his entire life as man, and also to the point of the cross where he himself endured suffering. There's also another book that I'll have listed, in the resources. But one thing, before I even share that portion with you guys, one thing I want to come back to, and you'll hear me say this again and again when I share with you guys, is relying on and trusting on the nature and character of God, right? When all else fails, when we have questions in life, we have to go back to what is God's nature and character. So in his book, there's another book that says, it's entitled, If I Were God, I Would End All Pain. And John Dixon writes, in the great work of God we call the universe, I cannot always follow the hand of the artist. Some of his work just eludes me. But what the biblical narrative tells me, and in particular, the account of Christ's passion, which is Christ's suffering, on the cross, is that while I may not be able to trace the artist's hand at all times, I can always trust his motives. And I love that, because amidst, a world full of questions, we have to bring ourselves back to the character, the nature of God, and that he has good motives in mind, right? So God uses pain and suffering in three major ways. One, he uses it to stir our hearts, towards himself through desperation and discomfort. In 2 Corinthians 1:9, it says, let's see, I have it on the next page here. It says, so Paul's actually talking about how they were, doomed to death. Like they thought that they were going to be, martyred at a point. And he says, in fact, we expected to die. But as a result, we stopped relying on ourselves and learned to rely on God, who raises the dead. So, Paul's basically saying, they multiple times faced death, but what that caused in them was this desperation, for God himself, who they realized in themselves they had no power. but that they would just trust God, knowing that He can accomplish everything, right? So we can more clearly see our need for God when we're going through hard times, because we are more aware of our own mortality and like our own finiteness, right? Like that we can do so little in this life to accomplish everything that we set out to do, especially as it relates to, healings and miracles and getting out of, situations for ourselves. The second thing that pain and suffering does for us is it allows us to bring comfort to others who have experienced a similar, hardship or trial. So, 2 Corinthians 1 verse 4 talks about we will be able to comfort others with that same comfort which is given to us by God. So that's an awesome part of being able to, to go through trials. Not that anybody wants to go through them, but as you guys know, if you've been through something and somebody says, I've been through something so similar, or even if they have that kind of compassion where they just say, like, hey, like, let me pray for you. I might not know exactly what you're going through, but they kind of enter into your suffering with you. There's almost nothing, more powerful than that in that moment of your heartache, The third thing that pain and suffering does for us is it prepares us for eternity by refining us, and also by reminding us that this isn't our home, right? We're told so many times throughout Scripture that we are merely passing through this life, and that it's, a blink of an eye, or that, just as the grass withers, and fades quickly, so too is this life. So two separate verses. I may just read through the whole thing. But in Romans chapter 8, verse 17, of course I don't have it open, but let me just flip over there really quick. So Romans chapter 8, verse 17 says, since we are His children, we are His heirs. In fact, together with Christ, we are heirs of God, God's glory. And if we are to share in His glory, we must also share in His suffering. Yet, what we suffer now is nothing compared to the glory He will reveal to us later. For all creation is waiting eagerly for that future day when God will reveal who His children really are. So basically, Paul in Romans is talking about how we are God's children, right? So we're His heirs. So everything that He has, we will have too. So He suffered, we will suffer. But also the glory that Jesus is already experiencing in his body in heaven, we too will experience. And so Paul's going, look, I understand your suffering, but look forward to those things that are to come. Now, in life we're going to experience a lot of beautiful moments, right? The birth of a child, a wedding day, a marriage, and even looking at His creation. But in light of everything that we experience, our hardship in life more closely prepares us for eternity than any of these things where we feel like most connected to heaven, right? Hardship prepares us again by refining us and reminding us that we're just passing through this world. We may not always know the purpose of the pain. I think I've kind of said something similar before to you guys. We may not always understand why it is that we're going through what we're going through, but we're all running this race called life, and we come to the end of it. The goal, of course, is to hear, well done, good and faithful servant. And everything that we encounter in this life, every pain, every loss, each disappointment, and each heartache will actually pale in comparison to being able to see Jesus face to face finally, So I have one more verse to share with you guys before I jump off of here. It says in 2 Corinthians 4:16-18, that is why we never give up. Though our bodies are dying, our spirits are being renewed every day. For our present troubles are small and won't last very long. Yet they produce for us a glory that vastly outweighs them and will last forever. So we don't look at the troubles we can see now. We fix our gaze on that which we cannot see. So again, I just want to point out that this is by no means, meant to be a comprehensive look at pain and suffering, or why we go through what we go through, or, is God still good in light of everything we go through? Short answer, of course, is yes. But I really just want to encourage each of you. I know that each and every one of us is going through a set of trials, and I feel like this kind of has become the topic that I go back to, but I just want to bring so much encouragement to all of you who are just going through it right now. Fix your gaze on heaven, fix your eyes on the author and the finisher of our faith, and know that there's a purpose for everything that we're going through. Again, we may not get the answer today or tomorrow or even in this life, but know that God has a perfect plan for everything that we're going through, and then your pain and your suffering is not for naught. It's not in vain, right? So I love you guys and hope you guys have an awesome Wednesday.